Okay, to sum up 68 years in 30 seconds, yeah, I think I can do that. So I think it all pretty much started career-wise for me when I went to Lincoln University in southeastern Pennsylvania. And one day I happened to meet this singer who was going to perform in the Lincoln University talent show and asked me could I play the Blood, Sweat, and Tears version of God Bless the Child, which I was able to do. And so I got the gig. But he was going to do another song. It turned out to be an original by the young man who was in the practice room next to me. And so I just inquired about it politely, and the guy came in and played the song. And it was one of the most beautiful songs. I mean, here was a college guy, a little college kid, skinny, tall dude with a fro that barely fit into the practice room, and playing these lyrics, playing this music and these lyrics that just seemed like they had to have been written by somebody 42 years old. And I asked him, I said, who wrote those lyrics? And he said, I did. And I started thinking to myself, I got all these songs. It takes me about an average of 1.5 years to write lyrics for each one of these songs. I'm going to be 80 years old before I finish all of my lyrics. So I just talked to him and I said, hey, you think you could write some stuff for me? And he said, well, what you got? So I played a song for him. He would ask me, well, what were you thinking? What were you trying to convey when you wrote that song? And I said, well, yeah, I was kind of smart about that, because I said, well, you know, if I were able to put it into words, I wouldn't have to play the music. You know, but that was kind of a smart aleck, you know, answer, you know, and he really was serious, and he wanted to know. And I said, well, I guess if I were trying to summarize it, I'm writing, it's a kind of a song, it's a tribute to the people who have struggled and died for us, you know, on our behalf, and for us to be able to do things like vote or eat anywhere we want to, you know, go anywhere we want to. It's kind of I kind of raise my glass to all of those people who fought for freedom and justice. And he said, play it again. So I played it. He took out his pen and his little notebook and he wrote some lyrics. And he said, can you play it one more time? So I played it again. And by the third time, he was teaching the singer, Victor, the lyrics to the song. That song was known as A Toast to the People. That's what we called it. And it was a song it was the first song that we wrote together. That young writer was named Gil Scott Heron, and we began to work together. We worked together for the next 10 years, writing some over 60 songs together and recording about nine albums. Later on, after that run, I ran into a lot of other fantastic musicians during that time and after that time. But some of the most notable ones were Phyllis Hyman, who I was already a huge fan of, and I was able to go on the road with her for almost a solid year, and that was such a pleasure. I recorded an album with Kool and the Gang. I recorded and produced Will Downing's first album. We worked on Gwen Guthrie's last album called Hot Times. I've had a great career, and I'm still. In 2000, I released my own album called Gotta Play. After all that time, and this year, after 20 years or so, I guess I was backed up, and so in the end, I'm now going to release 3 albums within the next year. Music was always in my house. I mean, I can't remember a time when music was not playing in the house of my parents. And at some point, look, I mean, there weren't any video games when I was a kid. When I was a little kid, there was barely even TV. So the most entertaining thing that I could do was to listen to music, and especially jazz music and bebop, because it was very exciting. It was very fast paced, and the drums and a lot of the drummers like Max Roach were doing boom, bam, 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 crash, and it was almost like that was my form of video game. So I got into it, and at some point I wanted to create my own video games, and so I asked my mom at some point if I could get a drum set, and she looked at me very seriously and she said, "No." And she said she said we live comfortably in this apartment, and I don't want us to be kicked out, so nix on the drums. So my next favorite instrument was the trumpet. And I asked her, could I have a trumpet? And pretty much the same answer for the same reason. So we settled on the piano, and I had to bug her for a few years. And when I was 7 years old, she got me to her music teacher, her piano teacher, who had taught her. And I began to study. I studied with her. Her name was Hepzibah Ross. And she was a graduate of Spelman College, and she was just a wonderful lady. My mom, the reason that it had taken her so long, I had bugged my mom from the time I was 5 years old until 7 when I started to study. I always wondered what she was doing during that time period. And of course, now that I'm an adult and have kids of my own, I can understand pretty clearly that she was probably saving up money so that she could buy me an instrument. And in fact, the first lesson that I took with, we called her Aunt Heppy, my music teacher, short for Hepzibah. I called her Aunt Heppy. And after my first lesson, I was on my way out the door, and she said, "Okay, now don't forget to practice." And I said, "Okay, wait a minute, I don't have a piano." And she said, "Oh, wait just a minute, wait right here." And she came and she brought me this little piece of cardboard, and I opened it up, and I was like, "What's this?" And it was a little piece of cardboard with the keys, with the piano keys drawn on it. So she said, so basically what I was supposed to do was like play the keyboard on this cardboard and try to imagine what it sounded like in my head, which maybe is why I'm able to kind of visualize now what things sound like when I play them, before I play them. I was always interested in the saxophone, and particularly once I heard John Coltrane, and when I heard people like Wayne Shorter, and I started to hear these great saxophonists, Gary Bartz, and there's so many great saxophonists. I thought, well, let me pick up a saxophone. And I had a little bit of money saved up, and I went to a pawn shop, and I was able to get a saxophone for, I don't know, $20 or something like that. And they gave me a strap that was it was just a little string. It was basically a piece of string with a little plastic piece around it to protect your neck, I guess. And that broke in about 2 days. So I went fishing in my mom's everything drawer in the kitchen, and I found some string that was about the same size. So, I tied it on the saxophone. I bought this little alto saxophone, and I hung it around my neck, and I started to practice. A couple of months later, one day I did something like, I don't know what, I was trying to raise my arm, like, I don't know, I guess it was in gym. And I realized that I couldn't raise my arm any higher than this. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't raise it any higher than this. So, that was weird. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, you severed your suprascapular nerve." And I said, "Well, what is that?" And he says, "Well, it's the nerve right here in your shoulder. Something that you've been doing, maybe hanging something around your neck, caused you to sever that nerve there. And so you can't raise your arm any higher than that." And I said, "Well, what do I do?" And he said, "Well, stop hanging things around your neck." So I had to give up the saxophone for a while. But the fingering of the saxophone was very much like the fingering of the flute. So I thought, well, here's a flute. If I get a flute, I can still practice my fingering until I can put a saxophone around my neck again. And so I bought myself a little cheap flute, and I practiced and practiced and practiced. And somehow I got into it. It was light, I could take it wherever I went, and it didn't bother people. So when Gil and I went to do our first album, it was together, it was just us. We produced it. And it was just me and him. So he could sing and play a little piano, and I could play piano and play a little flute. So that was great for most of the stuff that we had, but there were a couple of songs that kind of maybe needed a little bit more than that. And one of those songs was a song called The Bottle. And we thought that maybe it would be good to have something else on it besides just, singing and the piano. So I said, wait a minute, I have my flute. So I brought the flute into the studio, into the little control room, which was actually a little storage closet that had a water cooler in it. And we had to unplug the water cooler because the refrigerator in it was making so much noise. And we laid down this tentative flute solo, which ended up being part of the whole album, part of the song rather. And it sounded pretty good. But then a friend of ours said, why don't you put some drums and bass on it? So we called up a couple of friends of ours from Lincoln University, and they put some drums and bass on it. And who would have ever thought that 45 years later, that people would still be playing that song in clubs?